Welcome. Welcome to Celerity's first LinkedIn Live broadcast. I'm Ann Palmer, Celerity's newest employee. It's my third day. And I'm joined today by Celerity's CEO, Ken Quaglio. Ken and I will explore organizational resilience, that it's not enough to bounce back to where we were before COVID, but we can reinvent a better future. We'll get to consider uncertainty, risk, and authenticity, and it's possible that we'll talk about edge states and corporate values. But you really get to drive this conversation. I was born to ask questions, and I'll be glad to be your voice as we explore and challenge leaders like Ken through this episode and others. But the format here isn't Ask Me Anything. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Ken, would you mind saying a few words about leadership during the age of uncertainty?
Sure. First of all, welcome to Celerity End, day 3. So This is the way we roll. Leadership during uncertainty. So I think the first thing I would say is you have to embrace uncertainty. And the values that existed before a volatile period are the ones that will sustain you through the period of volatility. So at Celerity, for example, we had spent the past year really asking questions about who we are as a company and doubled down on our values. And then when the pandemic came, we found strength in those values, and they helped us get to the other side, whatever that's going to be, we don't know. But right now, they're sustaining us as a firm. So I think leadership during uncertainty is about recognizing that it's going to have a different impact on every person in the organization. And one of our core values, being empathy, enables us to step back and say, so what is this person experiencing, and how can we be helpful? Obviously the strain that everyone's going through right now is enormous. I saw a question pop up in chat about what is Celerity. So let me hit that real quick, because that's probably kind of important. We are a consultancy, so that doesn't tell you anything, but we really try to focus on 3 core beliefs, which is first and foremost that the customer drives the decision making about with whom they'll do business and under what conditions, even in some cases what price they will pay. So we put the customer, and I'll expand that to the human being at the center rather than the business at the center. Mm-hmm. The second thing we believe is, because of that, most organizations were built from the business out to the customer to dictate the conversation, and all the processes reflect how that business serves a customer. Consequently, a lot of businesses weren't built to deal with a model where the customer, who is a human being, is at the center, and they have to completely rethink their operations. And then lastly, this really gets to the core question that you asked, Anne, at the beginning, which is leadership in an era of uncertainty. Is most businesses don't embrace uncertainty. They hate uncertainty. They want to know what's going to happen next, and all their plans reflect, whether it's a 1-year plan or a budgeting cycle, a fairly formal, rigorous process of planning. And we fundamentally believe that that's almost impossible, because of the age of uncertainty that we live in. Forces businesses to constantly adapt to an ever-changing environment driven by human beings, which by nature are unpredictable.
Yep, thank you. I remember our first conversation, and I asked something similar about values and leadership. And I remember that you said that your values have to already be established because uncertain times test those values.
Right.
So I'm always trying to dig to the heart of what really matters, not just for organizations, but for the humans in those systems. You mentioned that already. One of the hallmarks of that first conversation was those personal and corporate values. Can you talk a little bit more about the foundations during those times of uncertainty?
The foundations of values. So I think there's 2 elements. One is the values of the firm, and then I think on a personal level, there's this notion of trust. So you don't become a great leader in times of uncertainty or volatility. The trust capital that you've acquired over the period of time that you've worked with the organization enables you to act in a certain way during those periods. So, for example, if you don't have the trust and you haven't been living your values during periods of uncertainty and volatility, you certainly don't just declare, well, this is who we are, because you're not living it. It's not something that people have inherently ingrained in them and believe and trust and know to be true. So you have to start that all the time. Now, what do you do then if you don't have those things? I think that's a struggle for any business. It's never too late to get started, but I think you have to be authentic about it. It can't just be perceived as, well, now we care about people. Well, you mean you didn't care about us before? So there's got to be authenticity, and it's got to be real, and it's got to be something that connects emotionally as well.
Yeah, authenticity keeps coming up, and the authenticity of building relationships. In our first conversation, you mentioned caring more about impact over ego. I think that was, we were talking about your personal values. How does an ethos like that inform driving business value or an organization's ability to bounce forward? And maybe we should explain what we mean by bouncing forward.
Yeah, so let's start with that, then I'll come back to the
Yeah.
question. So one of the things that you think about resiliency, if you hold a tennis ball at, shoulder height and you drop it, resiliency, it bounces back. And over time, though, it bounces less and less and less. What we're talking about is bouncing forward. So creating a vector as opposed to a scalar that doesn't have direction. We believe that in periods like the one we're faced with right now, that it creates new opportunities, that intersection of volatility and unknowns where two things or three things come together that aren't normally together, create diversity of thought and idea. And those businesses that embrace that rather than fight it, waiting to bounce back, but say, how do we use this opportunity to bounce forward, are those businesses that will succeed longer term. With respect to impact, not ego, I was thinking about this call and this notion of an ask me anything that kind of defies the impact, not ego. I think the impact, not ego, even on this call, is if there's one thing that people can take away from our conversation that they didn't know before, or a provocation that causes them to think about something differently, that's impact. By no means are we saying we know the answers to everything or anything. We have thoughts, we have ideas because we interact with so many people, both our clients, our people, our business, our suppliers, that we get the diversity of idea, and out of diversity comes amazing innovations and insights. And we're trying to share some of those today.
So you're hinting at something that I wanted to bring up. We've been comparing notes about edge states, the places where disciplines overlap. I was reading an article from Harvard Business Review this morning and wanted to pull a quote out from that. It said, these liminal periods, the boundaries of new states and experiences, are complex states to occupy. They can make you feel untethered and disoriented, but at the same time, they have great potential. The gift of transition is the opportunity for self-reflection, growth, and change. Can you talk a little bit about liminal states, edge states, and how that cultivates innovation and diversity of thought?
Yeah, so just by way of background, I was a biochemistry major and studying ecology, and we looked at the impact of pulp mill effluent in the Appalachian Bay. Now, I bring that up is because we had two rivers. We had the Econfina and the Fenholloway, and one of those rivers was polluted with pulp mill effluent, the other one wasn't. And what we found was where that effluent made it down to the bay, there was an impact on the diversity of species and the adaptability of those species. So that's a liminal effect. That's an edge effect. And I think in business, we've got three happening right now. We have an economic effect, we have a societal effect, and we have an organizational effect. And one thing is you hunker down, and I just read an article, 50% of B2B businesses are sort of waiting for the return to normal. The other response to all of that is you look for opportunities to change your business and adjust and gain competitive advantage. And I think that's really what excites me more than anything else, that these edge effects, these liminal effects, if you will, there's new opportunities in the diversity of thought that creates. And, we have this interesting situation. We have three major things happening at the same time, not necessarily good things. The cause for those are not necessarily good. But as a business, the question becomes one of, what do I do about it? How do I think about my business differently? A great example is in B2B. The shift from sales teams going out and selling face to face or over the phone to online was almost immediate. The challenge that creates is I can order online, but the whole support mechanism wasn't built to support an online order. So you've got the situation where a B2B customer is used to calling their sales rep and saying, hey, what's going on with my order? And now all of a sudden we're saying, go to the website, and there's no real self-serve. So this is a liminal effect that occurred, but the organization was not prepared to really deal with it. So there's two reactions. One is we just wait till we get back to normal and we'll just have our sales reps out there again. Or you ask the fundamental question, What if we changed completely? What if we did away with sales reps? What if we made those investments in creating an end-to-end experience for our B2B customers? Do they want that even? Would that be something that they would embrace? I think there's just so many questions that the liminal effects cause us to ask, and I think those businesses that ask those questions are going to come out ahead.
Let's bring it back from that edge a little bit and talk about specifics. We talked about values and diversity, leadership, and uncertainty. One of my friends is a strategy professor at George Mason. He talks a lot about the Stockdale paradox, this willingness to look at the very worst case scenario, but still being extremely optimistic about a brighter future. What opportunities do you see for bouncing forward, and how can leaders lead that shift in mindset away from, we'll just go back to the way things were?
Yeah. For those who don't recall, Stockdale was one of the longest serving POWs in Vietnam and was the running mate, I believe, for Ross Perot during an election a long time ago, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, before you, but I was there. Stockdale effect, what's interesting about it, if you read what he says, it's about changing the focus from the near term to the long term. And that's sort of counterintuitive in dealing with uncertainty. So if you are a POW and you wake up every day and you realize that you're in a certain condition, that can cause you to make or change your mindset versus taking a longer view. But it also says, what do I do here and now that matters, not the long view that matters. So in business, and we talked about this a little bit in a couple of posts that I did on LinkedIn, this cone of uncertainty. As a leader, if I try to, particularly now, if I were to say, this is what we're going to do in Q3 of 2021, my ability to state that with any definitive notion of what Q3 of 2021 is going to look like would be ridiculous. I'd be making a false statement and setting us up for a problem. I think for leaders, the Stockdale effect and the cone of uncertainty, what it basically says is, what am I doing now where I have good data to make decisions? And how do I make those along a course of principles or values consistent with where I ultimately want to go, and constantly adjust and adapt against those things? So what do I do in the near term where I have good data versus the longer term where I have poor data? There's no way Stockdale could wake up and say, next year I'm going to be free, but I survived another day. Ultimately, I will be free. So what do I do today to enhance that day when I am free from being a POW? And I think for leaders, that's the issue, is particularly for our people expect the leader to know the answer. And in the current world we live in, there's impossible to know the answer. So I can make one up and then be proven to be wrong. I can give faulty facts and be proven to be wrong, or I can say, I don't know the answer. I honestly don't know the answer, but these are the things we're going to do that A, will either help us get to an answer, or B, actions that we can take with data that we do know that don't commit us to something contrary to where we want to go, but are consistent with where we want to go.
That makes a lot of sense. I have it a lot simpler on a little Post-it note on my desk, and it says, what can I do today that will matter a year from now? So.
See, that's why you get to ask the questions. That's right.
Speaking of questions, I am hoping that there are some that that our facilitators will hand over our way from the audience. What can we answer for you?
Nothing. What kind of company? Okay, so we can both see that. So I am assuming everyone can see it as well. So I'm not going to name a company. I will give you a data point, and then I'll share what I think a decent answer is. So I've been amazed at the number of bankruptcies that are occurring on a daily basis. I wrote down some: Brooks Brothers, Lord & Taylor, Papyrus, J. Crew, JCPenney, Lucky Brand, Bed Bath & Beyond. I mean, the list just seems endless. We've had more bankruptcies in the past since April 1st than we've had since 2008. So these are companies that are not resilient organizations, or didn't see how the world could change and how they would have to be ready to adapt to it, in all fairness to them. Some of it is just the changing nature of retail. Rather than answer what a particular company would be, I think it's a company that embraces a VUCA world. And for those who don't know what VUCA is, it's this notion of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So I think those companies that recognize we live in a VUCA world and they train and behave consistent with what the implications are of a VUCA world are those that become resilient organizations. So an agile, agile development and agile enterprises by definition try to shorten the planning cycle to what's known. I think those organizations that have looked at their operations and not just tried to drive efficiency and lean, but ask questions about efficacy are resilient organizations. And those organizations that change the planning cycle from one of what are we going to say about the world over the next 5 years to one of what is the world telling us and how should we respond become resilient organizations. So I think the real key is knowing your customers and accepting the data, even if it's contrary to what you believe to be true. Two is creating an operating model that enables you to adjust quickly and adapt to what your customers are telling you. And I would say your customers include your employees and all your stakeholders now. It's not just the people you sell to. And then lastly, having the organizational mindset to challenge assumptions and ask hard questions and look at what the business needs to do to serve both its employees and the customers well into the future and be willing to change. Now, that sounds simple, but that's really hard for a lot of businesses.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you included employees in that customer group. Can you talk about how organizations, and this may be a particular question for Celerity, but how you have worked with intention for that employee engagement piece?
Yeah, so obviously, let me give you an example. I have a belief right now that many people have been working from home. The newness of that has worn off, and we're all facing a bit of a monotony right now. I wake up every day, the same four walls. I go through my routine. I work. I stop. I have dinner. I check emails again, and it's the same thing every day. And monotony leads to fatigue. So I think for our employees, you just have to recognize that. Our employees are working out of maybe a 2-bedroom apartment with kids running around, and it's not an ideal environment. So I think we just have to listen to what their needs are and do the best we can to respond to that. And I think that's true for businesses as well. It's this notion of truly not just listening, but understanding and being open. Too many conversations. Hey, how are you doing today? Great. What I want to talk about today is this. Wait for the answer. Listen to it. Understand what it means.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or two more questions.
So the question is being an army. So I was a helicopter pilot, and one of the things, and I was an instructor pilot, and one of the things we talked about was, there's three core metrics that you really have to watch when you're flying a helicopter: airspeed, heading, and altitude. And I think the same is true for business. You don't overcomplicate things in general. Airspeed, heading, and altitude. Where are we going? How fast are we going to get there? And are we far enough above the obstacles that we're not going to hit anything? And I think for leadership, keep it that simple. And I was also, sitting in the front seat. I think and I flew medevacs, but there were two guys in the back. We had a medic and we had a crew chief. And the other thing I learned from that is, if your crew chief says, hey, sir, we're getting a little bit close to this tree on the right, it's probably good to listen to her and move away from the tree. So this notion of trusting the team, working as a team, communicating as a team. The other thing we said in the military, and it's probably not popular now, is this notion of shoot, move, and communicate. And let me put that in business terms. It's take an action, move on to the next action, and make sure there's feedback loops to make sure that the action you took actually had the impact you wanted. So keep everything's in threes. Threes are simple for me. Airspeed, heading, and altitude, shoot, move, and communicate.
Well, you said keep everything in threes, so we've got 2 out of 3 questions. Let's take one more. A need for adaptability. How do you create an organization that is adaptable?
Yeah, so tomorrow we have our senior leadership team offsite, which we're doing virtually this time. We do them twice a year. We're going to take everyone through a VUCA exercise. So, talking about it or creating a PowerPoint slide is meaningless, but I think putting people in a situation where they don't know the answers to something and and asking them to think differently is inherently how you start to build adaptability as a core value. I think being honest in your communications about, I don't know the answer to this, but we can figure it out collectively. We're smart enough to figure it out. And even if we can't collectively figure it out, what are the things we should be looking for in an answer so that we don't miss those things? So adaptability as a core value is about creating an openness, embracing the diversity of ideas, not shutting people down because they come up with something that is different. I think diversity is where we breed innovation. And I think adaptability, you look at the United States, we have 5% of the world's population. We produce 60% of the Nobel laureates. Why is that? I think it's because we're an incredibly diverse society. And that breeds, back to the edge effect, that breeds this notion of the liminal effect and innovation and new species. And that's exactly what we're going through right now. And if we embrace that in business, if we embrace that as leaders, we embrace that unknown, I think we'll have new species of businesses that emerge.
I can't wait for that brighter future. Ken, you know tomorrow is my 4th day.
It is. What are you going to do?
And there's more ambiguity coming my way. Oh, thanks so much. Ken, before we wrap it up, last thing, I always am looking for book recommendations, podcast stories, things that have influenced you. Is there something that has really grabbed your attention lately that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. So this is going to be off the wall because it's not a business book. It's a book called The Gentleman in Moscow. And I recommend it because it's about perseverance. And I think that's what we all need right now is this notion of perseverance. This is a guy that wakes up every single day and has the right attitude. And you wonder what drives that. And it's just a beautifully written book. So I highly recommend it.
We'll make sure that is posted along with this, along with anything else that we referenced. Ken, thank you so much for kicking off Celerity's first LinkedIn Live series.
Thank you, Anne, and welcome to Celerity.
Well, in the coming weeks, we'll host a few more great guests and thought leaders to explore other big ideas and how we can bounce forward into a brighter future. Take care. Enjoy your lunch.
Stay well, everybody. Take care.